Interview, and then we're going to open up to questions to all of you. So, again, thanks for being here, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Very informative and nice socks. I didn't have to pick one.
I know. Well, you can't miss these.
Yeah. So anyway, you stated we've all heard of the triple aim.
Yeah.
But you talk about the quadruple aim.
Yeah.
So what's the fourth pillar?
Improve the care team experience. The most care is delivered in the home. Either self-care or by a loved one. It might be an adult child. It might be a spouse. And a lot of times they're not thought of as a core member of the care team when in fact they are.
You've had great success in business. I mean, we heard your bio. It's pretty impressive. And I asked the same question to Jonathan Bush. So I'm going to ask you, why would you choose to go into business or to be involved in this crazy, complex, highly regulated business of healthcare? I mean, why don't you stick in the tech world and do your thing? You're crazy.
Yeah. Well, and there was a time. You mentioned I had a dozen plus year detour away from healthcare.
Right.
I'm a startup guy. I like startups, and for a long time I said healthcare is where tech startups go to die. And it's just been this backwater for that. But I saw, 7 years ago when I started Avado, I saw a level of chaos and turmoil being foisted into the healthcare system, and I thought we're reaching the breaking point. And chaos and turmoil is good for startups. That actually provides some opportunity. It's still not easy. I like to ski, and I say, healthcare tech startups are the double black diamond in whiteout conditions of startups. But there's a hell of a reward if you get to the bottom and you're not, just carnage basically. And so, but then there was a piece, honestly, that I'm fortunate the way I happen to be born timing-wise that I didn't have to go to war. And to me, it's that dramatic. I believe our country is in desperate straits because of healthcare, and it's getting worse by the day. And so I feel it's a duty. And I have great parents who are very community-minded, and so I have that example. And so there's this notion of impact investing where you're going for double bottom line. Sometimes the idea is, maybe you accept lower financial return. But here there's such an alignment between impacting society and, yes, there's business opportunity in that too. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of profit opportunity in deflationary economics. And I'm not going to touch anything that doesn't, the quad aim is our first filter. If it is not improving the quad aim, we're not investing. And the people you work with are incredible in healthcare. Even a lot of us who've been inside the broken system and wanting to break out, the people who are those first 10% that are breaking out, they're really inspiring people to work with. So it's not work.
You stated in your blog, kind of referring to Healthcare 3.0, that there will be a shift of trillions from one set of providers to another set of providers over the next decade. So who are the winners and who are the losers?
Well, the winner, if you look at probably the short answer is go to healthrosetta.org. And the longer answer is you look in some of those areas, and it's ultimately, of course, it is about value, it's about the quadruple aim and who's achieving that. But it's things like reinvigorating primary care and the comprehensive view of primary care. A lot of people have a warped view of what primary care is in this country because we've done everything imaginable to undermine primary care. And basically turned into milk in the back of the store that's just there to churn you in and out to get you to high margin services. And that's why a lot of primary care practices gotten bought up by hospitals.
Well, let me challenge you a little bit on that. So you talk about improving that primary care piece. Our experience, I think, is that primary care MDs, they're unhappy.
Yeah.
You've even said in your blog that they're only 20% engaged, and there's a shortage of them. So how can we save the system through primary care with those roles?
Yep, they're there, but why is there a shortage? Because it's been made to be miserable. There's a lot of internal medicine docs who specialized and left family medicine because it was torture. And when you make it attractive, there will be these folks flocking back. They are. I mean, all these great next generation primary care organizations, they have no problem recruiting whatsoever. And also, it's a rethink, like I said. So absolutely, primary care docs have a big role to play, and I'm incredibly thankful for them. But a lot of times they're just glorified billing clerks today, and they're doing things, they're not practicing at the top of their license. And I put my family where my mouth is on this. I've got my parents in one of these great next generation primary care organizations, an organization called Iora Health. It's part of the Medicare Advantage program. And, Marty Green, geriatrician, primary care, amazing, love him. But he's just one piece of the care team. They have health coaches, dietitians, social workers, nurses. They don't have in-house PT, but they work with the whole care team. And so there's a lot of things that doctors and even nurses don't have the time nor the training to do to actually get at the core lifestyle issues that are creating these problems. And I think it's interesting, like where their clinic is located, they share a parking lot with a grocery store, not a hospital. Health outcomes are only 20% at best driven by the sick care system. There's all these other things that have a huge impact. And so there's that, is use all the members of the care team. And all that we've used technology for largely is a way to just, get bills out bigger and faster. When you actually use technology appropriately, and when I talk with docs, basically they will tell you a couple things. One is, my waiting room is clogged with people who don't need to be here, and the people who need to be here can't get in because it's clogged with people who don't need to be here, because I don't get paid if I don't see the whites of the eyes of the patient. 2/3 of them, I don't need to see them in person, but I force them to come in because I don't get paid if I don't see their eyes. So you remove those distortions, so much can be done through email, through text, whatever, and through the rest of the team and I've seen that in action. I'm happy to share some, more of the personal story there, but it's breathtaking. One of the examples of how affordable it is when you do it right, the Iora example, is because some people are like, oh, that's going to only be available for the rich. Well, first of all, my parents' thing, the reason I got them to switch wasn't the cost. It actually is less than what they were on before. It was because of better care. But they have another clinic, Iora does, in Jackson Heights, part of Queens, melting pot of America. There was one group that was not addressed by Obamacare, undocumented workers. And they partnered with Green America. Green is the founder who won the Nobel Prize for microfinance. Turns out there's microfinance in America. I always thought it was just like Guatemala and Bangladesh and whatnot. And the other thing that keeps people in systemic poverty, besides having the source of income, is healthcare. They're getting these largely Latinas, we're getting most of their healthcare in the ER, and it's keeping them from being able to earn income because exacerbations from diabetes or whatever. You know what they pay out of their own pocket? $10 a week for primary care that's better than what 99% of Americans get, rich or poor. So it's entirely doable. It definitely requires a rethink. There's going to be a change. But yeah, we're not going to fix it by just continuing.
Well, we need to get PT in that group so we can help you.
It's the total view of Rosen. I shared that story in my TED Talk, and
Actually, Rosen was the hotel that the private practice section was at, I think last year, wasn't it? So we all had our conference.
Okay, yeah, great example. So, they're spending 55% less per capita on health benefits. And I talk about them in my TED Talk. So I won't go through all that, but it's breathtaking, and they, so watch that incredible story, what they've done in their community, but I'll just go back to PT. So it's like, oh, I'm going to call Kenneth and say, I went on a site tour, but it was a while back. I was like, what am I going to do PT, you know, and he's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. PT is a big part of what we're doing here. And they're unique in that they have almost everything they brought in-house. They've hired their own, created their own on-site clinic, have their own doctors, nurses, pharmacists. The one thing they don't have with their own employees is PT. So they partnered with Cora because it has been so important to them. They cannot afford, if they had that PT in-house and they had a sick day or vacation, like that's bad for their employees. And so they brought it in-house, and going in, they would have thought that their need would have been for PT might have been 2 half days a week, but their gut said is probably more than this. They are 5 full-time days now, and it's really important. It's a big part of what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, a true next generation primary care weaves in PT, it weaves in pharmacy as well.
You know, you've said also that the middleman is kind of making all the money in healthcare, and insurance companies, they really don't have a financial incentive to lower healthcare costs. Because, so describe how the system happens. And you mentioned it a little bit in your talk where you said that, there's this big kind of lawsuit thing coming down the pipe, which is related to this. So, explain that a little more in detail, because I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, they actually have an incentive for cost to go up.
Right.
So that you'll go through in great detail in catastrophic care that goes through that, but I'll give you one example of that relates to this case that's going to break. And you can get more details. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, there's an article archive, and go back probably a dozen articles, and you see some like warning signs around fraud. And it was just mind-blowing to me that had I not, so basically I've been writing about this ERISA issue I talked about. And so I get this email out of the blue from Tommy Thompson. You may remember he was the HHS secretary under George W. Bush, governor of Wisconsin. I'm like, well, that's kind of wild to get an email from him. He's like, hey, I'd like to, I really, you are onto something on this ERISA deal, and I want to tell you about fraud. And I was like, yeah, some bad actor doctors and some pill mills, some bad stuff, but, not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. It's overplayed, or, that's kind of what they're thinking. And it wasn't coming out of Tommy Thompson's mouth. I mean, a lot of what he was saying is like, somebody else that wasn't so credible. I thought, okay, where's the Trilateral Commission and the black helicopters and all that, because it sounds so crazy. Basically, he's the chairman of the board of a company. It's called Healthcare Pays. Healthcarepays.com is their domain. And what they provide is the equivalent of visa fraud protection. So probably some of you will run your visa while you're here, and it will get blocked, because we're not used to seeing Steve in St. Pete Beach or whatever, and because it's their money, it's at risk. And so they have this software, uses similar algorithms, because you have a pattern behavior, and whether it's charging cards or medical, you have a pattern behavior that software can suss that out pretty easy. And so, given who Tommy Thompson was, and one of their big investors is John Snow, former Treasury Secretary, I mean, they could get to the access to the top guys at the biggest insurance companies. They're going to love this stuff. It's going to stop fraud, and they were just getting nowhere. And then they got pulled aside on trade too much in the detail, but basically the upshot was they got very direct feedback that they had no interest in stopping fraud. In fact, they liked it because anything that provided upward premium pressure was a good thing. Even if it was with self-insured employees. In fact, better yet, one of the odd things in our industry is after they left, because a lot of even self-insured employers, they have third parties process their claims. Oftentimes it's one of the BUCAs. And after they let the bank get robbed, they get paid 30 or 40 cents on the dollar if they recover in dollars. So that's another source of income, because they lose money when they're self-insured. So like that's absurd. And so the scale of it is just crazy. In fact, it blew their expectations. So this case is about to break if it doesn't get settled, which is possible, but I think the dollar is so big that it probably won't. So this company that does this, Healthcare Pays, that does this, can stop the fraud before the money goes out the door. They also can do a forensic analysis of what's happened. And there's a 6-year period for ERISA. They can look at the claims. So this company had 17 million claims over that period, big company, but not massive, like Fortune 200, 250. So big, but not, like Fortune 50 or anything. They found over 500,000 claims, not dollars, clearly fraudulent, to the tune of probably over $300 million. And when I say clearly fraudulent, these are people having once-in-a-lifetime events multiple times a week. I mean, the classic one is the 43-year-old steel worker who had 7 circumcisions in 7 days from 7 doctors. Like, I'm not a doctor, but probably a really good lifestyle. Multiple childbirths in a couple weeks. So once you take a step back, it's remarkably easy to steal from our healthcare system. And one of the crazy things is, like, guess who's doing it? It's our enemies. It's former Cold War opponents. As he said, it's an incredibly small logical leap to think that ISIS is getting this money, because you basically take the 150 million American insurance records that have been hacked from Anthem and Premier and others. They're out there on the dark web. They're basically become an ATM card for the bad guys when you combine it with a provider ID and a tax ID. Provider IDs you can download, MPI, like that. We had it for our product for a legitimate purpose. Go to irs.gov, boom, 20 minutes, you got a tax ID. It's normal for providers to bill with multiple tax IDs. And so then, halfway competent, computer scientist starts just running claims. And
so, but to cut to the chase, basically the employer is suing the insurance company for having paid those claims.
Yep, because you think you're paying them to stop that.
Yeah, because you hire them to basically run the healthcare business, as you call it, and they're overpaying for a bunch of crap.
They're overpaying. PPO networks are a joke. Yeah. You pay for the privilege of radically overpaying. Yeah. In most cases, and then you're paying claims that shouldn't be paid.
Yeah. And then there's the other side of it. I've also seen where you've said that any company that has over 100 employees is just silly not to be at least partially self-insured in doing so. So why do these companies still go to fully premium plans? Just because they're not paying attention?
Yeah, they're not paying attention. Really the perfect storm was, 20, 30 years ago, whenever a company started, they went to HR and said, keep our people happy, don't get us sued. Healthcare was a small line item. Power of compound interest, 10% this year it goes up, 15%, 8%. Now suddenly it's the second biggest cost. And so it's a big number, and it's just comfortable. And the industry has done a terrific job of making people think solving healthcare is like trying to solve a Middle East peace. Like, it's, everybody, my wife or my friends, you bring up healthcare and they're like, oh, they just want to put their fingers in their ears, and they just think it's hopeless and out of control, and the only answer is maybe single payer. That's what some people think. And they're like, well, I'm agnostic on how we pay, but to me, the 2 biggest problems in our system are pricing failure and overtreatment. There's no correlation between price and value. You see literally 60 to 1 price variance on things for no better quality, sometimes worse. And then there's massive overtreatment, like I was saying. And we're doing just as bad on that in Medicare and Medicaid as private. So that's not the silver bullet. We need to fix that too.
And then add into that this bad behavior of hospital CEOs.
Yeah.
That you've talked about too, where it's this, you call it predatory capitalism.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
It is brutal. I mean, some of the, I'm all for capitalism, and I don't have a problem with people being paid well if they add value. But the stories that I hear make my stomach turn of very mafioso-like behavior from, I call them tax exempt hospitals. Nonprofits, a misnomer. 7 of the 10 most profitable hospitals are so-called nonprofits. And I've seen, frankly, some of the most rapacious, blood-sucking, capitalistic behavior from some of these organizations. I mean, it's brutal. Just Google, hospital CEOs behaving badly in my name, and you'll see some of these stories. It's horrible. And I use maybe a rough analogy, and I'll preface it with, I'm Catholic. And so to me, it is like, you look at, say, the Boston Archdiocese. They did incredible things over hundreds of years that I'm very thankful for. And, saved people's lives and all that. Absolutely beautiful. That doesn't make it okay for an instant what they did in these clergy abuses. They acted above the law and with impunity. And that's the same thing I'm seeing with these organizations, is acting with impunity above the law. And I'm seeing them threaten people, and it's horrible. And not all of them are doing it. There's some amazing folks out there, but it is not one or two either. And so we got to call it out. And the heist is what it is. We're stealing our future.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So one of the things that we've talked about before was you saying that anything that's really happens in what we might call a revolution in this country starts from the ground up, starts from the people. Yeah. And often, at least recently, there's a documentary or something that opens the eyes of people. Yeah. So tell us about the big heist and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at civil rights. It was the evening news and the morning papers that really, what separated MLK in a lot of ways was his ability to draw attention to the issue. You saw it with Al Gore's film. You've seen it with food, with like Super Size Me and Food Inc. and some of those films. And so I looked at it and said, we have this incredible dynamic where on the one hand you have this highly wasteful, basically near dystopian type of system that we have on the one hand. And then on the other hand, what I call the health, was that it, this kind of health 3.0 is the North Star there. It's almost utopia by comparison. And I sort of joked, it's just a marketing problem. Like everybody would want this if they knew about it, right? And seemingly, almost everybody wins in this scenario. But it's the marketing challenge of the century. And that's when I studied, like, how do these big societal challenges get tackled? I was like, nobody's really made a game-changing film in healthcare that's fiercely nonpartisan. The closest thing is Michael Moore had Sicko about 10 years ago. So first of all, that was 10 years ago. Second of all, it's Michael Moore. Half the country won't listen to him. Yeah. For better reason. And so I'm not saying I won't, but a lot of people won't. Right. And there's a lot of wonderful documentaries that wonky people like all of us would probably gladly watch, but they won't reach Joe Sixpack. We haven't had a fiercely entertaining, nonpartisan film to take on healthcare. And so I just put that out there in a blog post. It was like, somebody needs to make this. And you're like, yeah, do it.
And now you're the executive producer.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know anything about filmmaking, but yeah. The more I delved into it, it's like, it's just basically like another startup. What do you do in a startup? You build a world-class team around you that know, things that you don't know. And you kind of are selling a vision about some project. And so, now I've got a former president of a division of Sony and Disney as my business partner on this. And it's sort of evolved from sort of the documentary to we're really looking at doing it as a feature film, sort of like The Big Short for healthcare. And the objective is to wake up America. And we're still going through the creative process fairly early, but one of the like what we're hashing out is kind of, I'm sort of the, I guess, subject matter expert. And the story that I'm thinking about is going to be the impact on, in kind of the aftermath of somebody who's had back issues, got addicted to opioids, overdosed, what the impact was on their family. And this wasn't some, flunky, this was everybody's best friend and a good guy, but got sort of, hammered, frankly, by our healthcare system. And then kind of let the story unfold from there to like, okay, well, how did this crime happen? And do it in a way that is accessible. Healthcare can be complex. And we're not going to be able to take on every issue in healthcare, but we're going to kind of follow the money approach and some things that people can understand. Almost everybody has probably either had back pain or has a spouse or friend or dad, mom, whatever has had, so it's approachable that way, or would take something like that that's approachable, and then say, okay, but we don't want to just be a moment in time. The thing that why we're so focused on getting this Health Rosetta Institute getting off the ground is when that happens, we want that grassroots movement to really be activated. You're a union leader, here's what you should do. You're a faith-based leader, here's what you should do. You're a business leader, here's what you should do. If you look at the civil rights movement, there was this thing called the Highlander School. This guy, Miles Ford, he trained a lot of the people that became leaders in the civil rights movement. So Rosa Parks didn't happen just randomly. She thought, oh, I'm going to do this. There was a very strategic thought process. And so it's this combination of doing that. And then we've talked some about this idea of having kind of crowdsourcing these stories. And the analogy that is sort of interesting to me is there's this organization you can Google called the Shoah Foundation. Shoah is the Hebrew for Holocaust. So Steven Spielberg's really involved. They don't want to lose the stories of the people who survived the Holocaust and more recent genocides. So we want to have these stories. You convince people through stories. And so, one of the things we want to do is have that, but also some film contests that can start to build this groundswell and then highlight particular issues, like what's going on in musculoskeletal. Why? There's a lot of things that went into the opioid crisis. It's not that alone, I get it. But it's one of the big things, like uncover some of these. What are these?
So give a little plug.
Yeah.
So if we want to go in and learn more about the Big Heist, give us how to do it.
BigHeistMovie.com. And if you want to support it, /give.
And then the way to do that is this is going to be funded a lot by crowdfunding. And basically, for those of you who know what crowdfunding is, if everybody puts in $25 and $50, you get a lot of people doing it, then you're going to raise the money as opposed to just a few big donors. So, I think that's something the physical therapy world could really do this and help do that small fundraising. The other thing Dave and I talked about too was perhaps what we can do is do this film contest you're talking about that, on your iPhone, you can record a patient experience or a patient story, and if it's compelling enough, and it comes in, we can do it for, ABTA might want to do something very professional. Some of us might want to do something on our iPhone, with a patient or something. And then those stories coming in could make the book or the film if they're compelling enough, and then you bring your professional filmmakers in to do the cool story.
Yeah, definitely. And the idea with the film contest is we'll work with people focusing in particular areas, say, the physical therapy community around musculoskeletal issues, and say, let's focus in there, let's get some stories around there, and we'll have this footage. And there's, the ability to make pretty good quality films has been really democratized, and there are talented, aspiring filmmakers, film school students that we want to then tap into and say, hey, take this, we give you kind of the raw materials, remix it, do your own take on it, you can add stuff to it. And I'm sure there'll be a bunch of average stuff, but I think there will be some real gems. There's some next generation Spielbergs out there, and a lot of these are millennials, and that's one of the groups we want to wake up. You look at a lot of these movements, they're not exclusively one generation, but it tends to be 20 and 30 somethings who drive a lot of these movements, whether it's civil rights or climate or whatever.
Okay, I want to make sure we open it up in time for questions, so just one last thing.
Yeah.
No one's been able to answer this, but perhaps since you're here, you can. So how's the Trump administration going to affect healthcare 3.0?
Well, that's a good question. And I think but I think you can, I think we can all agree that presidents have bully pulpits. He's been using it before he's even inaugurated. And there are some, obviously the whole Obamacare thing was a big political deal, but I think status quo in general, because of the populist movement that's both Trump and Sanders, status quo in a lot of ways has been put on notice. Like, it's not going to cut it. And there are some issues like this fraud one that if you looked at like education reform, after the human tragedy of Katrina, there was a lot of things that happened in New Orleans around education reform. And I think that there is a crisis. People don't realize that the scale of criminal fraud that's happening, it's bad if a hospital overprices, but at least it's staying within our economy. But these dollars are leaving the country to bad people. That's a real crisis. Crises provide opportunity for change. And, when Tommy Thompson reached out to me, my best hope was I could get him and some other past HHS secretaries to come out and say, hey, party aside, we need to, address this risk issue and so on. Well, it turns out Tommy's pretty dialed in to the current powers that be. I mean, he was governor of Wisconsin. Guess who a protege of his was? Paul Ryan. Some of the people that he's part of the transition committee for healthcare. Some of the people in there. So there are things, as much as like Obamacare, ACA got politicized, one of the most consequential pieces of legislation that's happened since Medicare passed in healthcare was MACRA, which was 94-6. This is last year that happened. So there are ways for both parties to get together. And I'm not a partisan. And I'm also a congenital optimist and look at the opportunities in these things. And so I think there's a real opportunity there. And so I'm optimistic on that particular front.
Okay, great. If somebody wants to make their way to the mic, we'll get a question. And while you're going up to the mic, I just think it's interesting that in our neighborhood, Cambia, which is the bigger company that the Blue insurances are under, you've said that they see this and they're aggressively diversifying to avoid the healthcare Katrina. Because they're not going to be sustainable either. So they've got to put their money in other places. They
are investing a tremendous amount of money in technology companies and in next generation primary care companies, really across the board. It's true of, like United Healthcare, they just, I don't know if you saw this in the last week, they bought for like $2 billion, ambulatory surgery center company. The lines are blurring, between plans and providers. The smart ones will, Optum's a huge business for United. And so, they are doing a bunch of those type of things. Yes, smart.